Imagine you're baking cookies, not just for fun, but to run a cookie empire. What ingredients do you need? How many ovens? When do you stop hiring more bakers because they're just bumping into each other? This chapter is where economics meets everyday operations. We'll explore how businesses make smart decisions about input, output, and cost, and how these choices shape success. Buckle up. There'll be graphs, curves, and maybe even a lame joke or two about marginal productivity. In this chapter, we explore how inputs are transformed into outputs using production functions and how costs evolve with output. As a manager, knowing where your costs come from and how they scale is crucial. Think of this as decoding your firm's economic engine. A production function specifies the maximum feasible output given amounts of inputs. It shows how different combinations of inputs, like labor, materials, and equipment, can produce a certain level of output. Imagine you own a bakery. Your production function might show that with 5 bakers and 10 bags of flour, you can produce 100 cakes. If you increase the number of bakers to 6 and use 12 bags of flour, your production function might show that you can produce 120 cakes. This helps you understand how different combinations of inputs affect your outputs. Returns to scale describe the relationship between output and the proportional variation of all inputs together. There are 3 types. Constant returns to scale. If inputs double, then outputs double. Increasing returns to scale. If inputs double, output more than doubles. Decreasing returns to scale. If inputs double, outputs less than doubles. Returns to a factor is the concept which examines how output changes when we vary one input while keeping others constant. There are 3 key measures. First, total product. This is where the total amount of output produced when you increase the amount of one input, like labor or raw materials, while keeping everything else constant. The second is average product. This is the total product divided by the number of units of the input used. It tells you how much output, on average, each unit of input produces. And third, marginal product. This is where the change in total output that results from using one more unit of the input. It shows how much additional output you get from adding one more unit of input. Understanding these concepts helps analyze productivity and efficiency in the production process and highlights how input variations impact overall output. This slide reinforces the law of diminishing returns. After a point, each worker added creates less output. Picture a pizza shop with 10 workers, but only 1 oven. That's not exactly very efficient. Here's another example. Imagine you own a bakery and you want to understand how hiring more bakers affects your production of cakes. If we're talking about total product and you currently have 5 bakers and they produce 50 cakes a day, and you hire 1 more baker, you now have 6 bakers producing 60 cakes a day. Total product is the total number of cakes produced. For average product, if 6 bakers produce 60 cakes, the average product is 60 cakes divided by 6 bakers, which equals 10 cakes per baker. For marginal product, if hiring 1 more baker increases your total production from 50 to 60 cakes, the marginal product of the additional baker is 10 cakes. This helps you understand how efficient your production process is and how adding more inputs, like bakers, affects your overall output. We can see the relationship between the output of a production process and the variation in a single input while keeping all of the other inputs constant. Imagine you're running a pizza shop. You have one oven, which we will call fixed input, and you're adding more employees. That would be your variable input. At first, the first few employees make the shop run better. One rolls dough, another adds toppings, one runs the register. Productivity increases fast, but then you keep adding more workers, and eventually they start getting in each other's way. There's only one oven and not enough space, so each new worker adds less and less to the total pizza output. This is, again, the law of diminishing returns. When you increase one input, like labor, while keeping others fixed, like the oven. The additional output from each new worker eventually gets smaller. In manager terms, total product keeps going up, but the marginal product, the output from each new worker, starts to decline after a point. This is normal and helps you figure out the optimal number of workers before productivity starts to flatten out. Isequents are maps that show different combinations of inputs, like labor and capital, that can be used to produce the same amount of output. Think of it like a recipe. You can make the same dish by changing the ingredients slightly, as long as the results taste just as good. Substitutability means, can you swap one input for another? For example, can one extra worker do the same job as a new machine? Some inputs are easy to substitute, others aren't. You can't just replace an oven with 10 more employees. For managers, understanding how flexible your input choices are can help you control cost. They can help you adjust to price changes if labor becomes expensive, and they can help you stay efficient in production. Isequent lines represent combinations of inputs with the same total cost. When combined with isequents, managers can find the cheapest way to achieve a desired output. This is just a visual representation of multiple isequents. Again, this helps firms analyze where they might be operating inefficiently. This graph shows what happens when you input prices change. Your least cost combination of labor and capital shifts. Think of switching from hiring local contractors to offshore talent as relative wages change. Total cost rises with output. Marginal cost is the cost of producing one more unit. Average cost is, well, the average. And opportunity cost, that's the value of what you didn't do with those resources. Imagine you own a restaurant and you want to understand how to minimize your cost while maintaining the same level of service. Cost minimization. If you currently have 5 chefs and 10 wait staff, and you spend a lot on labor costs, you might find that hiring 4 chefs and 12 wait staff can provide the same level of service at a lower cost. This is because the wait staff can handle more customers, reducing the need for chefs to prepare food quickly. Optimal input mix is the principle that involves finding the best combination of inputs, like labor, materials, and equipment, to produce a given level of output at the lowest cost. Changes in input prices. When the prices of inputs change, the optimal mix of inputs might also change. This means that you might need to adjust the combination of inputs to maintain cost effectiveness. Imagine you own a factory that produces furniture, and you want to understand how changes in your input prices affect your production costs. Viewing the optimal input mix, if you currently use a combination of wood and labor to produce furniture, you might find that using a certain amount of wood and a certain number of workers is the most cost-effective way to produce a given number of chairs. If the price of wood increases, you might need to use less wood and more labor to maintain cost effectiveness. Alternatively, if the price of labor increases, you might need to use more wood and fewer workers. This helps you understand that by adjusting the combination of inputs based on their prices, you can achieve the same output at a lower cost. Cost curves let you visualize how your expenses behave. They're essential for understanding pricing decisions and scalability. Imagine you own a factory that produces bicycles. You want to understand how different costs affect your production. Total cost curve. If you produce 100 bicycles, your total cost might be $10,000. If you produce 200 bicycles, your total cost might be 18,000 bicycles. The total cost curve shows how your costs increase as you produce more bicycles. For marginal cost, if producing one more bicycle increases your total cost from, say, $10,000 to $10,050, the marginal cost of producing that additional bicycle is $50. For average cost, if your total cost for producing 100 bicycles is $10,000, the average cost per bicycle is $10,000 divided by 100, which equals $100 per bicycle. Makes sense, right? Opportunity cost. If you decide to use your factory space to produce bicycles instead of, say, skateboards, the opportunity cost is the profit you could have made from producing skateboards. This helps you understand how different costs impact your production decisions and overall profitability. In the short run, at least one input is fixed. Maybe it's your factory lease. In the long run, everything's adjustable, which gives managers more flexibility, but also more responsibility. Fixed costs, like rent, don't change with output. Variable costs, like wages, do. Managers have to distinguish between these when they're making shutdown decisions. This slide shows typical short-run cost curves. As output rises, marginal cost first falls, then rises in a classic U-shape. In the long run, average cost is the envelope of all the short-run curves. Firms plan based on long-run curves, but they operate day-to-day with short-run realities. Here we see both long-run average and marginal cost curves. Firms aim to operate at a minimum long-run average cost, like cruising in the efficiency lane. Imagine you own a car manufacturing company and you want to understand how different costs affect your product production in the long run. So for the long-run average cost, LRAC, if you produce 100 cars, your average cost might be $20,000 per car. If you produce 200 cars, your average cost might decrease to $18,000 per car due to economies of scale. The LRAC curve shows how your average costs change as you produce more cars in the long run. The long-run marginal cost, the LRMC, if you're producing one more car, increases your total cost from, say, $2 million to $2,018,000. The marginal cost of producing that additional car is $18,000. The LRMC curve shows how your marginal costs change as you produce more cars in the long run. This helps you understand how different costs impact your production decisions and overall profitability in the long run. Minimum efficient scale, or MES, is the smallest quantity in which you achieve minimum long-run average cost. It helps you determine whether an industry will have many small firms or a few large ones. Economies of scale happen when producing more lowers your average cost, often due to spreading out your fixed costs. But beyond a point, costs can rise again, creating diseconomies of scale. Think of, say, management bloat. Learning curves show how experience reduces costs. For example, in manufacturing, workers get better and faster. Materials are used more efficiently and waste goes down. Learning curves displays the relation between average cost and cumulative production volume. Costs decline with production experience. This graph compares cost savings from scale versus learning. Managers must distinguish whether cost reductions come from volume or experience because the strategic implications differ. Economies of scope occur when producing two products together is cheaper than producing them separately. Think shampoo and conditioner in the same factory. The profit maximization rule is MR equals MC. As long as revenue from one more unit exceeds the cost of making it, you should keep producing. Pretty simple, right? If marginal cost changes, maybe due to a supplier hike, then optimal output changes too. And managers have to monitor cost shifts constantly. The marginal revenue product, MRP, shows the added revenue from hiring one more unit of input. It helps managers decide how many workers or machines that they should hire. To make informed decisions, managers need to estimate both short-run and long-run costs, like to decide whether to expand your factory or invest in new equipment. You need to estimate both short and long-run costs. We do this using regression analysis. This statistical method is used to estimate costs based on historical data. It helps us in understanding the relationship between cost and output. By analyzing historical data on your production costs and output levels, you can use regression analysis to predict future cost. For example, if you know that your costs have increased by $100 for every additional 10 units of output, you can use this information to estimate future costs. Short-run costs might be approximately linear, meaning if they increase at a constant rate as output increases. If your short-run costs increased at a constant rate, you could predict that producing 100 units will cost you $1,000 and producing 200 units would cost you $2,000. In this chapter, we'll explore how different types of markets affect business decisions. Spoiler alert, pricing and output strategies in a farmer's market look very different from those at, say, Apple or Amazon. Here are the learning objectives for Chapter 6. You can use these learning objectives as a guideline to make sure that you're getting the point. Market structure defines the landscape a firm competes in. Like sports, the rules, the market conditions, shape how you play. Knowing the structure helps managers predict competitor behavior and set their strategies. Market structure refers to the characteristics of the market environment, including the number and size of buyers and sellers, the degree of product differentiation, the amount and cost of information about product price and quality, and the conditions for entry and exit. Imagine you own a small grocery store and you want to understand the market structure you operate in. We could look at it from the number and size of buyers and sellers. If there are many small grocery stores in your area and each has a small share of the market, this indicates a competitive market structure. Conversely, if there's only one large supermarket, it indicates a monopoly. Degree of product differentiation. If all grocery stores sell similar products, there is low product differentiation. However, if some stores specialize in, say, organic products or imported goods, there's higher product differentiation. The amount of cost and information can be viewed from the perspective of, say, if customers can easily find information about prices and product quality, the market is more transparent. If information is hard to come by, the market is less transparent. And then conditions for entry and exit. If it's easy for a new grocery store to open and compete, the market has low barriers to entry. If there are significant obstacles, such as high startup costs or strict regulations, the market has high barriers to entry. We have four classic structures of a market: perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. And each has its quirks and implications for pricing and profits. In perfect competition, this is a market structure where there are many buyers and sellers, and no single seller can influence the market price. Products are homogeneous, meaning they're identical and interchangeable. A monopoly is a market structure where there's only one seller in the market. The monopolist has significant control over the market price and can set prices to maximize profits. Monopolistic competition is a market structure where many firms sell similar but not identical products. Each firm has some control over its prices due to product differentiation. Oligopoly is a market structure where a few firms produce most of the market output. These firms may or may not differentiate their products, and they often have significant barriers for entry that protect their profitability. In perfectly competitive markets, firms are price takers. The firm's demand curve is horizontal. Charge more and you sell nothing. Charge less and you're just giving away profit. In the short run, the firm's supply curve is the marginal cost curve above average variable cost. This helps managers understand how production responds to market price changes. The long-run supply curve is flatter and more responsive. Firms can enter or exit depending on whether they're earning normal profit. Long-run supply affects industry dynamics. Here's a graph of the short-run supply curve. And here's a graph of a long-run supply curve. The long-run supply curve is flatter and more responsive. Firms enter or exit depending on whether they're earning a normal profit. Competitive equilibrium happens when supply equals demand. Prices guide firms and consumers like an invisible hand, unless, of course, someone trips over regulation or innovation. Barriers to entry shape market power. Barriers to entry are obstacles that make it difficult for new firms to enter a market. These barriers can include things like high startup cost, strict regulations, strong brand loyalty, or control over essential resources. From patents to brand loyalty to having a massive factory, they protect incumbents and they deter new arrivals. Managers must assess these in strategy planning. Imagine you want to start a new airline company. Here are some barriers to entry you might have to face. High startup costs. Starting an airline requires a significant investment in aircraft, maintenance facilities, and staff training. These high costs can deter new entrants. Regulations. The airline industry is heavily regulated with strict safety and operational standards, thank goodness, that new companies must meet. Obtaining necessary licenses and certifications can be a lengthy and costly process. Another barrier to entry is brand loyalty. Established airlines have strong brand loyalty and customer trust. New entrants might find it challenging to attract customers who are loyal to, say, Delta or United. Another barrier to entry is control over resources. Established airlines may have long-term contracts with airports for gate access and landing slots, making it difficult for new entrants to secure the necessary infrastructure. These barriers help protect existing airlines from new competition and maintain their market position. A monopoly, remember, is one firm, total control. But with great power comes great inefficiency. Since the monopolist faces the whole market, it chooses output where MR equals MC, but charges higher prices than competitive firms. This graph shows standard monopoly behavior, less output, higher prices, and deadweight loss. Not great for consumers, but excellent for shareholders, at least in the short term. Monopolistic competition features many sellers offering similar but not identical products. Think toothpaste, Colgate versus Crest. Differentiation gives pricing power, but not forever. Profits get competed away. This graph illustrates how firms in monopolistic competition sets prices slightly above marginal cost, but can't sustain economic profits long term due to new entrants. Oligopolies have few players. Again, think airlines or maybe even cell phone carriers. Their actions are interdependent. Strategic behavior matters, and sometimes it feels more like chess than business. Nash equilibrium suggests that each firm does its best, assuming that rivals do too. The result? A stable outcome, even if it's not the best for all involved. It's like agreeing to not start a price war, unless, of course, someone blinks. Here's a visual of Nash equilibrium showing how two firms' strategies intersect. The Nash equilibrium is a concept in game theory where each player in a game makes the best decision they can, taking into account the decisions of the other players. In this equilibrium, no player can benefit by changing their strategy while the other players keep their strategies unchanged. The Cournot model assumes each firm chooses quantity, assuming rivals hold steady. The result is mutual adjustment until a stable output is found. And this is a great model for analyzing duopolies. This graph shows the Cournot equilibrium. Each firm's output is based on the expectations of the other firm. Managers in real oligopolies often use this logic to forecast rival and competitive behavior. Here we compare output and pricing across collusion, Cournot, and competition. Managers do need to know that collusion is illegal. Cournot is strategic, and perfect competition is often, well, theoretical. The prisoner's dilemma is a concept in game theory that shows why two individuals might not cooperate, even if it is in their best interest to do so. It demonstrates how self-interest can lead to suboptimal outcomes for both parties. This prisoner's dilemma visual here shows why cartels fail. Firms are tempted to cheat for short-term gain. Long-term cooperation requires trust and enforcement, and that's really hard to do legally. Imagine you and a friend are suspected of crime and you're being interrogated separately. You both have two options: confess or stay silent. Here are the possible outcomes. Both of you stay silent. If both of you stay silent, you might get a light sentence because there's not enough evidence against you. If both of you confess, you get a moderate sentence because you admitted to the crime. However, if one confesses and one stays silent, the one who confesses gets a lighter sentence for cooperating, while the one who stays silent gets a heavier sentence. The dilemma arises because each person is tempted to confess to get a lighter sentence. But if both confess, the outcome is worse than if they'd both stayed silent. This shows how self-interest can lead to a worse outcome for both parties. Cartels try to fix prices and output but self-interest usually leads to a breakdown. That's why most cartels either collapse or get prosecuted, sometimes both. The cartel's dilemma explains the challenges faced by firms in a cartel when they try to maintain cooperation to set prices and output levels. Despite agreeing to cooperate, individual firms have an incentive to cheat to gain more profit, which can lead to the collapse of a cartel. They agree to limit production to keep prices high. Here are the possible outcomes. Cooperation. If all companies stick together and they stick to the agreement, they can maintain high prices and enjoy higher profits. Or there could be cheating. If one company secretly increases its production to sell more oil, say, at the higher price, it can gain more profit. However, if other companies notice and start cheating too, the increased supply will lower the price of oil, leading to the collapse of the cartel and reducing profits for all. The dilemma arises because while cooperation benefits all companies, the temptation to cheat for individual gain can undermine the agreement and lead to worse outcomes for everyone. Today we covered several important concepts, including production functions, returns to scale and factors, isequence, and cost minimization. Recognizing how inputs relate to outputs and costs helps firms make efficient production decisions and maximize profit.